Hey there! I know what you're thinking. Psychology sounds complicated, right? All those theories, all those names, all that science. But here's the thing, it might seem confusing at first, but I'm going to make psychology simple by explaining it in a story way. So don't worry. This is the story of the origins of psychology. And like every great story, it starts with a question that changed everything. Picture this: ancient Greece, around 400 BCE. Philosophers are sitting around in togas, debating under olive trees, and they're asking something humans had never really asked before. Where do our thoughts come from? There's Plato, pointing up at the sky, saying, the mind and body are separate. Knowledge comes from a divine realm of perfect forms. Basically, he believed we're born knowing things, that knowledge is innate. But his student Aristotle? He's pointing at the ground, at the real world. No, teacher, he says. We learn everything through our senses. We're born as blank slates, and experience writes on us. This wasn't just philosophical small talk. This was the first chapter of psychology's story, the great debate between nature and nurture, between what we're born with and what we learn. And spoiler alert, we're still debating this today. But here's the thing, for over 2,000 years, psychology wasn't psychology. It was just philosophy, just people wondering, no experiments, no proof, just really, really good questions. Fast forward to the 1600s. Enter René Descartes, a French philosopher with wild hair and even wilder ideas. Descartes is sitting by his fireplace one day and he has this thought: I think, therefore I am. Simple, right? But revolutionary. He's proving that the mind exists by the very act of thinking about whether the mind exists. But Descartes makes another contribution to our story. He suggests that the mind and body interact through a tiny gland in the brain, the pineal gland. He's wrong about the specifics, but he's right about something crucial. The mind and body talk to each other. Around the same time, scientists are starting to understand the body better. They're mapping nerves. They're studying reflexes. They're realizing that when you touch a hot stove, your body pulls away before you even consciously decide to. The body is entering psychology's story. And the mind is starting to look less like a mysterious soul floating above us and more like something connected to our physical being. Now we jump to 1879, Leipzig, Germany. A man named Wilhelm Wundt does something no one has ever done before. He opens the first psychology laboratory. Before this moment, psychology was all theory, all philosophy. But Wundt says, no, we're going to measure the mind. We're going to experiment on consciousness itself. He creates this method called introspection. Basically, he trains people to carefully observe and report their own thoughts, feelings, and sensations. He'd show someone a light, a sound, an object, and ask them to describe exactly what they experienced in precise detail. It sounds simple, but it was groundbreaking. For the first time, someone was treating the mind like a science experiment. Psychology had officially separated from philosophy and become its own field. Wundt called his approach structuralism. He wanted to break consciousness down into its basic structures, like a chemist breaking down compounds into elements. But not everyone agreed with Wundt's approach. Enter William James, an American psychologist with a pragmatic streak. He looks at Wundt's work and says, why are we just describing mental experiences? We should be asking why we have them. What purpose do they serve? James develops functionalism, the idea that we should study what the mind does, not just what it contains. Why do we remember? To survive. Why do we feel fear? To avoid danger. The mind, James argued, evolved to help us adapt to our environment. This is where psychology's story gets really interesting, because now we have two schools of thought, two ways of looking at the mind, and they're just the beginning. Now let's travel to Vienna, turn of the 20th century. There's a neurologist there named Sigmund Freud, and he's about to drop a psychological bombshell. Freud is treating patients with mysterious symptoms, paralysis with no physical cause, amnesia, anxiety, and he starts to suspect something radical. What if most of our mind is hidden from us? He develops psychoanalysis, and with it comes one of psychology's most famous ideas, the unconscious mind. Picture an iceberg. The tip above water? That's your conscious mind, what you're aware of right now. But beneath the surface is this massive hidden part, your unconscious. It's full of repressed memories, forbidden desires, unresolved conflicts, and according to Freud, it's running the show. He talks about the id, our primal urges, the ego, our conscious rational self, the superego, our internalized moral compass. He says we're all walking battlegrounds where these forces fight for control. He introduces dream analysis, the Oedipus complex, defense mechanisms. Some of it seems wild, even scandalous. But Freud does something important. He makes psychology about more than just conscious thought. He suggests we're strangers to ourselves. Not everyone bought it. Critics said his methods weren't scientific enough, that you couldn't test or measure the unconscious. But Freud opened a door. He made it acceptable to talk about the hidden parts of human nature: sexuality, aggression, childhood trauma. Psychology's story just got a lot deeper and darker. Early 1900s America. A psychologist named John Watson is getting frustrated. He looks at all this talk about consciousness, unconscious minds, and introspection, and he says, this is all too subjective. We need to study what we can actually observe. Watson launches behaviorism, and his message is clear. Forget about the mind. We can't see thoughts or feelings, so let's study behavior instead, what people and animals actually do. He teams up with the work of Ivan Pavlov, who discovered classical conditioning by accident. Pavlov was studying digestion in dogs when he noticed something weird. The dogs started salivating before they got food, just hearing the footsteps of the person who fed them. Pavlov had discovered that you could create associations in the brain. Ring a bell before feeding a dog enough times, and eventually, the bell alone makes the dog salivate. Behavior, Watson argued, is all about learned associations. Then comes B.F. Skinner, who takes this even further. Skinner introduces operant conditioning, the idea that behavior is shaped by its consequences. Reward a behavior, and it increases. Punish it, and it decreases. Skinner believed free will was an illusion. We're all just products of our conditioning, shaped by rewards and punishments throughout our lives. Behaviorism dominated psychology for decades. It was clean, measurable, scientific, but something was missing. By the 1950s, some psychologists are getting restless. They're saying, wait a minute. By ignoring the mind, aren't we ignoring the most important part of being human? Enter the cognitive revolution. Psychologists start studying the mind again, but this time with scientific rigor. They're inspired by computers, these new machines that process information. What if the mind works the same way? Cognitive psychologists start mapping mental processes: attention, memory, problem solving, language. They create models and experiments. They prove you can study the mind scientifically without just watching behavior. Around the same time, humanistic psychology emerges as a response to both behaviorism and psychoanalysis. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow say, humans aren't just conditioned animals or bundles of unconscious conflicts. We have free will. We seek meaning. We strive for self-actualization. Maslow creates his famous hierarchy of needs, a pyramid showing how we move from basic survival needs to the highest goal, becoming the best version of ourselves. The story of psychology is getting richer, more complex. We've gone from philosophy to biology, from consciousness to behavior, and now we're integrating it all. So where does that leave us today? Modern psychology is all of these stories woven together. We have biological psychologists studying how brain chemistry affects behavior, cognitive psychologists mapping how we think and remember, social psychologists exploring how we're influenced by others, developmental psychologists tracking how we change across a lifetime, and clinical psychologists helping people heal from trauma and mental illness. And here's the beautiful thing. That ancient debate between Plato and Aristotle, we now know the answer is both. Nature and nurture both matter. We're born with certain tendencies, and experience shapes us. That question about mind and body, we now know they're inseparable. Your thoughts create chemical changes in your brain. Your brain chemistry affects your thoughts. Psychology's story isn't finished. We're still writing new chapters, understanding neuroplasticity, exploring the effects of technology on the mind, uncovering the mysteries of consciousness itself. Now you know the story. From ancient Greek philosophers to modern brain scanners, psychology has been humanity's attempt to understand itself. And here's the secret. Once you understand it as a story, everything makes sense. Each theory, each discovery, each debate is just another chapter in this ongoing adventure of self-discovery. So here's what I want you to do. If this story helped you understand psychology, if it made those confusing concepts click into place, then pass it on. Share this journey with someone else who thinks psychology is too complicated. Hit that like button to let me know this story-based approach works for you. And subscribe because we're going to explore so much more of psychology this way. Every concept, every theory, every discovery told as the fascinating story it really is. Because at the end of the day, psychology isn't just a science. It's the story of us trying to understand us. And that's a story worth sharing. Thanks for being part of this journey. I'll see you in the next story.